You're going to shoot some questions at me?
Yes, sir. I'll prompt you.
Good, good.
You could start with your full name, please.
Calvin Lester Havekost,
And can you spell that, please?
Havekost. First name is Calvin. L. Havekost.
And where and when were you born?
May 19th, 1924.
And how old does that make you currently?
93.
And where were you born?
Monroe, Michigan.
And can you tell me about your family? Who were your parents and what were their names?
My dad was Lester and my mother was Louise, and they were born in Monroe County, both of them. We go back two more generations.
Fifth generation.
Fifth, yeah, five generations have lived, and until she moved away, well, we were all within 50 miles of each, or 10 miles of each other. Yeah, and then kids started going off to school and colleges.
And did you have any siblings growing up?
I had a brother 9 years younger than I am.
And what was
So,
his name?
Kenneth.
And were you guys close as a family growing up?
I wasn't close to my brother because of that span of age difference. But yeah, we were very close. Yeah. Well, it was a farm, and we had neighbors within a few miles around us that were also farm people, and I had an uncle who farmed next door to us. So it was a good time. It was a very good time. I grew up on a nursery, so we had all kinds of fruit. We had a grape, a vineyard, pears, apples, peaches, whatever, being in the nursery business.
And what age did you start working on the farm?
Say 5, 6. I didn't, of course, we had horses when I was probably 12, and I would drive those at various tasks. I didn't plow with them, but I had it on the hay process where we had a loader behind that picked up the hay and dumped it onto a wagon, and I drove the horses while we were picking up the hay from the rows that the hay was raked into.
Now, do you remember growing up during the Great Depression?
We never had a depression on the farm. I mean, we had eggs, we had pigs, we had cattle. It wasn't a big problem, other than I asked my mother why we can't have beef on Sunday instead of chicken and mashed potatoes all the time, but that was something that we didn't have a lot of. We had pork and chicken and other good things that kept us going.
And did your mother help around the farm at all? Or what did she do?
She did. I mean, raising the chicks. We milked cows, and then we separated the milk. It became skim milk, and we separated that from the cream. So she would make butter. And the Saturday night trip to town included eggs, chickens, baked goods, a whole bunch of things that they would sell to. They had a group of people that bought from them every week, and so every Saturday they took a lot of things in. And Mom worked harder than Dad, I have to say that. And I helped her with the chickens and other things that were important, so that we had products to sell, and fruit too. We would have baskets of peaches during the season, apples, pears, all those things they'd take along with them. So they had quite a load of things when they left on Saturday night.
And tell me about your schooling. Where did you go to school? Who were your friends there?
Okay, I went to Havekost School. My great-grandfather evidently had a lot to do with it. They cannot come up with any records, but he was very prominent in the community, as was my my dad and my uncle. And so I went to Havekost School, and I went to a church school in town. And on the 6th and 7th grade in town, and I came back to Havekost School for the 8th grade, and then that was a play year because the church school in town had me advancing, and I just didn't have a lot going on in the 8th grade, so I lost out a bit on some of the math and so forth. I rode my bike to high school, about a 8 to 10 mile ride every day, and then on the way home I had a paper route that consisted of many miles, and I was delivered the Detroit Times 6 days a week, and then the Sunday paper on Sunday, which was a big load.
So you got your exercise.
So I got my exercise, yeah. I traveled maybe up to 15 miles on my routes.
You remember what you were getting paid for that paper route?
I got 2 cents for the daily, and I think I got 5 cents for the Sunday. So I made maybe $10, $11, $12 a week from that.
And was that your money to keep?
Oh, yes. Yep. I kept that in a bank account, and Mom was very specific about that. So that was my experience dealing with the public, and it was very, very helpful. I learned a lot of math. I think the daily paper I collected 18 cents, and the Sunday paper maybe 10, maybe 12, 15 cents for the Sunday paper.
Do you remember your friends from school?
High school, yeah, that was, I still remember almost, we had 238 students that graduated with me, and I probably could name 150 of them today yet.
Do you remember what you used to do for fun during high school?
Yeah, football games, baseball games.
You played baseball.
Yeah, I played baseball in the summer.
What position did you play?
I liked to pitch. My dad was a pitcher, so I guess it came naturally that I would follow in his footsteps. And, yeah, and I didn't play any sports in high school because I got out an hour early to peddle papers. So I was not able to compete on that basis. But in the summer, we had a newspaper anyway, sponsored a youth group, and that's when I played most of my, I played every day, every chance I had on weekends and evenings in the summer with neighbor kids. I was always organizing a baseball game somewhere. And on the Sunday, we would drive a few miles to a sandlot stadium to see who we could pick up to challenge. And that was my real life was baseball. Loved that. Detroit Tigers.
Now, did you graduate from high school?
Yes, yeah.
And what did you do post-graduation?
Went in the service. I mean, that I graduated in June and was signed up in February and left home in March 23rd to begin my Army career.
And what year did you graduate high school?
42. And then in the spring of 43, we were on our way.
So do you remember the attack on Pearl Harbor and where you were? And
I was squirrel hunting. And we had a big woods behind our farm. And when I came in, Dad said, "We're in trouble." He said that Honolulu has been bombed by the Japanese, and he seemed to feel that I may be going into service to help with the fight that we had ahead of us. So it was, as a kid, yeah, I mean, you didn't take it too seriously. I didn't. And thought, well, when the time comes, I'm ready to go. And had no military people in the family other than a great-grandfather who was a German sailor. And I had no one else close to me that in the family that had been in service.
So you enlisted into the Army?
No, I was drafted.
You were drafted.
I was drafted, yeah. Your friends and neighbors, they sent you a letter and congratulations. We want you to report to so-and-so. So I went to Detroit, to Fort Wayne, it was called at that time. I guess maybe it still exists today, at Fort Wayne, and that's where I signed up. They said, well, we have a quota for the Navy today. So I went all through that, and when we were, I got to the end of the line, and they said, you're going in the Army. I said, well, how come? They said, well, you're colorblind. So that kept me out of the Navy. So I had always, my great-grandfather being in, and we lived on Lake Erie. We were close to water, so I kind of grew up with that. And I thought the Navy would be fine.
So what were your feelings after you were drafted, and then what were your feelings once you found out that you couldn't go into the Navy?
I accepted that. I mean, I was fine with that. I just wanted to get into it, get over with. That was the attitude that most of us had, was just get this job done and get back home.
Now, did any of your friends enter service as well?
Yeah, a lot of them did. A lot of them. Air Force, Navy. In fact, our hometown, I went with probably 10 people that I graduated from high school with, 10 fellows. Jumped on a train, and we stayed together pretty much through the service, and some of us even came home together from Michigan, so it was a good time. I mean, we had a solid unit. I mean, we meshed with, we had guys from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. We had Indians who couldn't read or write. They didn't leave the country when we left the country as a unit. They were discharged or put into limited service at some point. So I had a lot of neighbors and friends from high school, and it worked out.
With Uncle Herbie.
Yeah, then I went with my brother-in-law to become. He won the Air Force. They split us up. We went to Camp Custer in Michigan, and they went from A to M, and then from N to Z, went off in one direction, and I went in one direction from half of the group. So, but the group I went with, we had friends and high school grads that stayed with me pretty much all the way through. It was nice. It was a good feeling.
Now, talk to me about your basic training experience. Anything stand out in your memory from that?
Yeah, we went down to a town called Palacios. It was Camp Hewlin, and there was 6 of us per unit. This was a new camp. Of course, they threw up a lot of those. The camp was, I forget how many miles south of Victoria, Texas. We were on the Matagorda Bay because we were assigned to anti-aircraft. And anti-aircraft needed a place to fire guns out over the water. So it was a good place to be, and I had 2 Indians. There was 2 Indians in our camp. And we would write letters for them or read letters that were sent to them. What stands out was the mass after we were been there. Well, that was 6 weeks, probably 8 weeks. Was the weekends when we had massed march with other units, and we would get out on the parade field, and that was a lot of fun, interesting. Then they tested us all for OCS, which is Officers Training School. Some of the guys that had been in college already were good candidates for that, and so they were pulled from the unit. Anything exciting? Yeah, I was a mail orderly, so everybody was a friend of mine, hoping to get mail and waiting for me to call their name. Then when we left, wasn't a lot going on there in Texas. We just kind of fell into the routine and took orders as they came along. Nothing exciting that I can remember. It was great swimming in the Gulf, and when springtime came around. But and then I was assigned to a battery as their clerk, and so I went from mail orderly to battery clerk, and that's where you take in all the information, people that's sick and ill, and anything that might happen if somebody goes AWOL or so forth. You put that on your morning report, and that goes into headquarters. Then, trying to think, I guess we were in Tennessee on maneuvers. We went from Palacios, Texas. Well, back up. We fired out over the Gulf. They had a plane that towed targets. And of course, I was a battery clerk, so I was exempt from, I learned a little bit about guns. I never got into the machine gun and the half-tracks. You know what a half-track is? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I never got into that. And so then we, after we had our basic training, we went to Tennessee, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and we dug in the rocks. I was then transferred to I was in head and then transferred into headquarters and still kept in my job at, well, let's say I went into then record keeping for the battalion. So that was my job. I became a corporal while we were in Tennessee, and was schooled in what my future job would be of record keeping for the battalion. Tennessee was a tough go. I mean, we got toughened up there because we had, it was Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and it was just rocks everywhere. So we tried to dig in a command post, and the infantry guys had to dig in to make foxholes. And that's what I remember about Tennessee. Oh, we would put some money on a stump back in the woods, and then seemed like a quart jar of moonshine would appear, and the $20 or whatever we put on the stump was gone. The excitement is that's the thing. I didn't have a lot of exciting things going on other than I was being promoted as we went along, and left Tennessee and went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, North Carolina. Yeah, Fort Jackson. That was can't think of the name of the town and right now, and. There we got into a pretty solid routine and learned our jobs, and was there from August to the end of December when I was selected to be the administrative person to go to Europe and an advance party, along with a administrative captain, and then we had also a sergeant in the motor pool, and the captain of the motor pool. So we had trying to remember what we called ourselves. I was in the administrative end. There was just 4 of us went in this advance party, and yeah, transportation and administration. So we left Christmas time, went to New York. We were there. I went to the Brooklyn Navy Yard for about a week. Finally shipped out January, I think the New Year, maybe the 2nd of January, to Europe on the Queen Elizabeth. Now that was exciting, except we were down on the E deck where they had stacked us. We had 4 bunks high on E deck, which was down at the waterline or below, I'm not sure. We were hoping there was no subs waiting for us out there. We had somewhat got the sub situation under control. I mean, earlier in the year, the German subs were having, shooting up our trips, our maritime trips, hauling supplies and things to Great Britain. So the Queen Elizabeth was a bit of excitement. Of course, now I've been told this, that we had 20,000 men on board the Queen. It was the largest and fastest ship afloat at the time. It would go over 6 knots, which was faster than a sub. So the subs, if they were laying in wait for us, had a chance, but we could outrun them. So we went to the Firth of Clyde in Scotland, went into Edinburgh, and from Edinburgh that same day we shipped down to a town called Hereford, England, and then the following day or two we went down to what they call the Midland Moors, kind of the home of England. There wasn't anything much there except that they were building a camp, or had it pretty well completed. Let's take a break.
All right.
I've got to England, middle of England. Let me pick up where were we? We're Queen Elizabeth. We got over to Europe. Now we're in the middle of England, and it's a fairly new camp, so our job was to set up an administrative headquarters and bring in some of the jeeps and equipment that would give us enough to move around with and pick up supplies and things like that. Our unit was supposed to arrive within a week, 10 days, and the ship that was to bring our group of men over to Europe had a problem on the way back from Europe, and they were delayed 2 weeks. So we were 2 weeks over there, and had a chance to get acquainted with the English people and their families. They had a very limited amount of fuel to heat their houses. They would sort of save the lumps of coal that they had for the evening to build a fire to keep them warm. Rationing was very strict in England. We did not hear any of the bombings at that time. London was being hit, and Shakespeare's town, Stratford-on-Avon, was just blown to bits. That was close to us. We did hear the bombing in that, but we were in the middle of England, and the closest town was Buxton, which was a leather processing place. But we had to give way to the sheep as we drove our jeeps around, and the roads would be just covered with animals of various types. It was an interesting time, and as I say, we got acquainted. The nearby community was called Leek, L-E-E-K. That was a little town that we were stationed nearby. And so we would go in there to the theater and restaurants were very few. They didn't have a lot of food. You could get fish and chips anywhere. That was the main diet of the people, and for us too. If you went out for the evening and you went to the theater, after the theater, you would get your fish and chips and maybe pick up a girl or have taken her to the theater and put her on a train to head back home. Yeah.
Now, had you been assigned to a unit at this point? You said you were.
Yeah, I'm still with the AAA automatic, our anti-aircraft automatic weapons battalion. I'm still with that same outfit, and all through the war, I was with that same outfit. So we still had this close relationship, and I had a good group of Michigan people. Eventually, the outfit arrived, and we drew more supplies and were set up administrative headquarters at the town, at our camp. And then we weren't there very long when we headed for Wales to fire over the Irish Sea with our guns. And so they, again, towed the targets along over the water, and we fired our machine guns and the anti-aircraft guns at the targets. Wales was an interesting place and full of apple orchards, and then in the orchards were just piles and piles of bombs and munitions. Fortunately for me, I was a courier between the town of Wales and the town was called Aberystwyth. And so I would go down to the camp headquarters at Leek and one day and then go back the next day so we could travel. I had a weapons carrier and a driver, and so we could goof off a little bit and see parts of the country, which was really nice. And fortunately for me. So I didn't have a lot of record keeping other than to report that illnesses among the crew, among some of the guys that came over, and how things went on the ship, and talk to some of the guys about their experiences. We were in Wales probably 3 weeks firing, and then went back into camp. Then we took on a lot of forced marches, so to speak. I mean, we'd 5, 10, 20-mile marches to get in condition for Europe. Once we got underway, we traveled south through some of the larger cities. In fact, that's when we went through Shakespeare's town of Stratford-on-Avon, and which I mentioned earlier was pretty well destroyed. We went down to what they called a POE, port of embarkation, getting ready to go to the port of embarkation. We settled in a little town east of London called Gillingham, and we had great quarters there. We took over some apartment buildings, so to speak, in that town, and for our headquarters anyway. And we weren't, and with Southampton as our port of embarkation when and ever the invasion were to take place. There again, we did a lot of prep work, caught up on a lot of things that our travel time and what happened and so forth. And we could hear the nightly bombings of London. At that point, we were, maybe 50 miles, 40 miles, 30 miles from London? I'm not sure. I didn't keep a lot of detail. I didn't keep a diary, so, which, of course, years later you regret. We were in the town of Gillingham, and when the invasion was about to begin, We had a broadcast of Eisenhower's speech, and let us know that the invasion was imminent, and give us a prep talk. And then the afternoon, late afternoon, the late afternoon, yeah, they started towing gliders over the position that we were in. We could see the sky just fill up with gliders, and these gliders contained men, jeeps, all kinds of equipment, and they were to be dropped behind the lines in Normandy. That was so we knew things were underway at that point, and it was quite a sight to see this, and somewhat a key element in the invasion that started the next day. But so many of the glider people were injured, some were killed. Some of them they had overloaded with the jeeps and men, and so when that crashed, some of those got injured. So it was a very, we learned this later, but it was a very difficult time to connect up together. None of our men were involved in that. That was airborne, and but we were fortunate to see what was going on. And that was very important, that we had men behind the lines that could destroy machine gun nests and other gun emplacements that the Germans had set up. And the day of the invasion, we saw, of course, lots of airplanes flying over. They were bombing the battle. You could hear the battleships firing on the coast there at Normandy. D+12, we had gone to the port of embarkation, which was Southampton, England, not too far from where we were, and they loaded us on LSTs, which were the troop ship of the day, which we built thousands of, and we D+12 headed out into the English Channel. In the meantime, the dockage area for heavy equipment had been blown away in a storm. So, as I remember, our forces had about 27 miles that they were inland, and we felt like sitting ducks if the Germans had an air force, because there were just hundreds and hundreds of these LSTs with men and equipment on board, just sitting there in the English Channel. And of course we had battleships and cruisers all around us, and nothing really serious happened. We were there for 2 weeks. Wait a minute. From 12 to 27, that's not 2 weeks, that's 15, yeah, that's 15 days, isn't it? And they could land troops, but they couldn't land the heavy equipment. So we had to wait until on board the ship. We ate all of our rations. We started eating out of the ship's gallery while we were sitting out there in the channel, because they had to rebuild the docks to get our heavy equipment, our guns and so forth in. They couldn't land them in the water. They got stuck. So they had to rebuild a dockage area so the heavy equipment could go off onto the land.
So were you sitting on the LST for 2 weeks?
Yes, we were. And there again.
And can you describe the amount of space that you had and how many other men were on there?
Oh gosh, probably 200 men on the boats. I haven't researched it, But and we just kept ourselves busy playing cards or whatever anything else. We could go up on deck and air ourselves off and enjoy the deck. The weather was not stormy at that time. We had avoided the storm by being delayed from leaving Southampton. So we just sat out there and ran. As I say, we had been given so many rations. We had backpack. We had we had a huge barracks bag and a backpack, our rifles. So when, yeah, it was just
Are there cots on board?
What?
Are there cots on board these LSTs?
Yeah, they had again cots stacked. They weren't as bad as on the Queen Mary. They didn't have that big a boat, but we had cots. Yeah. Had no armor, nothing there. We were defenseless, actually. The defense was all around us with boats and aircraft if we needed it. But
and did you ever experience seasickness at all?
no, never did. Never did. Loved the ocean. Loved the ocean. And it was not a lot going on. Boy, I can't think of what we might have done other than we couldn't do any training. When we finally got to unload our heavy equipment, then I went in on Omaha Beach. They went in on, what's the other beach?
Utah?
Utah, yeah. I went in on Omaha. They went in on Utah. And we landed, we got off the boats and onto the LSTs, the landing craft, and got ashore. I guess we got our feet wet going ashore, but at that time, as I told you earlier, I think we had advanced to a town called St. Lo, which was the crossroads for the Germans to bring in supplies and so forth, and 27 miles in. So the first thing we did, we dug in foxholes. Well, they unloaded our equipment and stationed them around an area there that we were in. We dug foxholes, set up mess tents, communications, headquarters out to where the gun batteries were to be placed. And the first night, nearby, the Germans came over and released cluster bombs, which underneath the plane they had a big rack, and then these smaller bombs were in these racks, and they scattered those bombs. It was an anti-personnel thing, and that's as close as we got to any serious bombings. And several times we were strafed. We were set up in apple orchards there in Normandy, and after probably 4 or 5 days, this town of St. Lo, the crossroads, we started bombing that area, and we just laid in our foxholes or out in the orchards and watched the bombers come over from England. And that went on probably for 4 continuous hours, that they just pulverized that town. And went on all morning, and then later in the day it went on again. And so we just sat tight, and 3 days later our outfit got to go through that town, and there was still animals that had been killed, bodies that had been killed. The day of the bombings, the infantry went in there, and one of the captains got killed, and they laid him. This church, there was nothing left but the back wall, and they laid him on a makeshift altar in that church for that afternoon. And so when we went through that town, which was rubble, There was animals, German troops, equipment of all kinds just scattered in the area. It was an orchard-like area again. And the town was pulverized. I've got a picture of a Jeep going through the town, and you could see some of the damage that took place.
Do you remember what was going through your head as you were witnessing?
We were witnessing the foils of war. I mean, the spoils of war. That was our first exposure. At that point, I don't think we had shot down any planes yet. That was it. I mean, the really tough facts of what was going on hit us at that point. I mean, we saw what destruction and life meant, I guess, to us and to them, because we lost a lot of men too. The Germans did not want to give up that area.
Were you guys attached to any specific infantry division?
Fifth Army at that point, yeah. They hadn't really determined what we were going to do until we got to Paris. We bivouacked along the way. We just, all of a sudden, after that breakthrough, the Germans retreated, and we had very little combat other than several times we were strafed by German planes. Because there was at that point they were massing a lot of American troops, let's put it that way, infantry and so forth. So they would come through, very limited though. Maybe it'd be one or two planes that would come through, and you always thought that you were going to get to your foxhole, and you just hit the ground when you heard it. Maybe you got squeezed in behind an apple tree or something. You think that was going to protect you. But it was a funny feeling that you got as the planes come in, and that again was our taste of combat a little bit. So you just hit the ground, and right where you were, you didn't get to your foxhole.
Any close calls for you?
No, no. Fortunately, I think we probably had a couple of men on the gun crews out wounded, but no, I had a pretty comfortable life in the military, in the infantry. We got to Paris quick-like. The Germans had retreated, they'd pulled out. We went in there, yet they were sniping in the west area of Paris, but we went in full battle gear. The August 28th or 29th, and there was, we went through a lot of towns on the way to Paris, and the people were just so kind to us. They'd throw us loaves of bread. Sometimes you'd get a bottle of champagne, which you had to share with, maybe you got a sip, share with your buddies. But yeah, the towns were just so jubilant to see us go through. And then we got to Paris, and Paris opened up, and we you'd get all the drinks you want, and you get bread is the primary food that the people have. They didn't have much other than that, but they treated us real well, which soon changed when I went back later on in the winter. But
now you're keeping records all along the way?
Yes, yeah.
How are you keeping records? Are you typing? Are you writing?
I had punch cards. I had punch cards, a 1040 or something. That sounds like income tax. But these cards, and each man's name was on the cards, and if one were wounded and so forth, I had to punch out sections, or I would make notes on it. See, the morning reports would come in to me from each of the 4 gun batteries, and then I would look them over to see anything important that needed to be transferred to officers or enlisted men's cards. So that was kind of a historical type thing, and that's what we did. What I did, that was my main responsibility. I helped with payroll. later on, well, we will get into that later. So that is where we're at. We got to Paris, and we were assigned then to the 29th Infantry Division, which was under General Omar Bradley. And then I went into the headquarters of the 29th Infantry. No, we didn't either. We stayed separate. I mean, we traveled along with them, and our gun crews and our half-tracks went with them. As we went north, we turned and went north, and we went into Belgium, and we ended up in Herleen, Holland, or the Netherlands is where we ended up. And that was, we were set up then to invade Germany in the spring of the year. So we had very little combat going north, very little at all. And we went from Paris north, where meanwhile the infantry is spread out and they're going through Germany. They're south of us. And Patton, of course, he's going big time. So this was not we got shelled. The Germans had these huge cannons that were on rail cars. And they hit a barn very near our location once and blew the roof off and just splintered the barn all to pieces. But fortunately, I don't believe anybody got hurt. But these big guns would continually fire. You'd hear the shells going over us. But combat for the 29th was somewhat limited. When we settled in in the Netherlands, we were just inside the border, on the German-Netherlands border. And we were stationed there throughout quite a bit of the winter. So we were just north of Bastogne. We were the North Division connected with the British. The British were north of us, but we were the lead division in the north for the United States. And we were, when the battle for Bastogne developed, we immediately started training day and night. And we did not go down to go in, to go south. Fortunately, after the storm and the terrible battle, Patton got his cannons there, and the weather broke, and then we had air power and his tanks, so we were able to repel that. We would have been totally cut off had the Germans been successful in going through to Liège, Belgium. Their attempt was to cut us off, the 29th, and then they would hopefully have enough troops that they could fight the rest of the way and hold us off, but that did not happen. And fortunately, their battle with the Russians kind of took them out of the picture. They didn't have the troops that they needed to, had they gone through and cut us off. So we were somewhat concerned because we knew, we had some idea, our intelligence officers, and I was in headquarters, so we had an idea of what was happening in Bastogne, and it wasn't good, and we were wondering how long it would be before we went in there. But the weather and Patton getting there in time, we didn't have to go into that. So that would have been a taste of battle to any and all of us if it had gotten to that point. So those were a bit scary times.
At any point, did you fear for your life? Or?
No. See, I never got into a serious combat situation. Right. So that's what I guess I told you. I really didn't have a lot. I'm no hero, other than I did my job.
I beg to differ.
They say that it takes, 50 50 ground people or 50 people to service one combat person.
Is that right?
Yeah, 50 to 1. I mean, you got truck drivers, you got people delivering gas, people delivering supplies, you've got people back here in the States, and you have people, intelligence people in Paris that are trying to decipher and break the German codes. I mean, when you think about it, I had friends that were stationed by the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. They could see it out their window where they were working on trying to figure out what the Germans were doing and picking up on their codes and so forth. I mean, these people were critical. And back then, we did have computers. We were working on computers. I had friends in Cincinnati, Ohio, that had rooms full of these huge, half a boxcar sized computers that they were working on way back in the 40s already. But battery powered. And so that was the scary part, and yet we went about just our ordinary business of keeping things in order, and hoping we didn't have to go into Bastogne. But if we did, we were kids. I mean, you just said what we got to do. We got to do. Most of us had a girlfriend back home, but that was it. So we just felt comfortable, and whatever it was going to be was going to be. The guys in the Pacific, they had it entirely different. I mean, they were landing on beaches over there and being torn apart. We started out that way when we went into Normandy. I mean, they had these stone walls and hedgerows, and they would just set up behind these hedgerows, and that's where our half tracks would come in handy too. With all the 450 calibers, you could take them out, and then the tanks could knock those walls down or those hedgerows down, and that was a tough go to begin with there in Normandy. But and then after we moved in, we'd go to the farmers and get eggs and hard cider and whatever else they had under their barn floor or their basement floor. And it was a nice time for us, because we were not in the combat zones. So they treated us very well, and the people in Paris same way. So from Paris, we went north with the 29th. The 29th had been in southern France, where the Germans had their sub-pens and that, and they went through that, and then they were brought into the Paris area or France area, and we joined up with them as combat support with our aircraft, our firepower to shoot at the aircraft. I would get a daily briefing as to how many planes they shot at. Occasionally they would knock one down. The Germans did not come over in any great force, but when they did, low flying, they would send out planes to scout our areas where the greatest number of troops were, try and get in there and hit them. But and so there was many units that we had for low-flying aircraft, and that's what our principal thing was. And then the half-tracks guns, if they got into a town or a village over there in France, and they were snipers in, say, a church tower or something, those half-tracks could get within, say, a mile and then open up those machine guns. They could tear that. Those 50 caliber bullets could tear that steeple right down out of the place. Or if they were in a home or a higher building, that was the purpose of our half-tracks. And they were very mobile, so they could go in with the infantry and help them out. And then of course, our 40 millimeter guns were stationed around the area that we were scheduled to protect. Trip north was from Paris to Belgium, and there's another community in there too, small one. huh. Anyway, it was uneventful. We set up. We were there for the winter, and in the spring when the Roar River, we were on the took the Roar River into Germany, and that was the spring offensive. And we again kept moving readily. The infantry was facing opposition, but we went through all of the industrial areas in northern Germany. You had Cologne was a big one, Maastricht. Oh gosh, why can't I remember those towns? Anyway, all the industrial centers, Hanover, all these places had been bombed out pretty well. And so we set up as headquarters in what was left of those towns, and the gun crews again set up around it, and had very little pressure from the Air Force, and not a lot of pressure from the ground troops. So we moved steadily across Germany, as the main combat area was in the south of Germany, and really not a lot comes to my mind about our trip in the spring of the year, other than we just went through rubble. The young children and the women were very industrious about cleaning up these towns. They would start, I guess, as soon as we went through them. They were picking up the bricks and stacking them, and outside, and sweeping the streets and the walks, and getting things back in some order, living in rubble, many of them. They didn't pay much attention to us, what civilian populace was left. We liberated one manufacturing plant where they made munitions. The Germans made munitions, and they had people from Poland and Holland and all over working there. As the people came out of these areas, they were just skin and bones. It was sad. They would just sit on the curb. Life had gone out of them, so to speak. You could see that. Our unit, we did not get to Auschwitz or some of the more serious camps, Dachau, but this one area in particular, I remember was all fenced, very high fences, as people were trapped if they were from Poland or wherever they came from, but you couldn't identify much of them. They were just skin and bones and sort of zombie. Sad. Your hatred for what the Germans had done, and I'm German, my ancestry, but you had a hatred that, well, it's put into you when you're in the army. I mean, you're there to do a job. You're there to kill rather than be killed, and that was what they had taught us, and we were not happy about seeing that at all. And hundreds and hundreds of those people all through Germany were treated like that. I had friends. My wife had relatives, a couple of them that were in camps. Tried to escape, got hauled back into camp, and then all they had was sawdust to eat, so to speak. They made bread, put sawdust in it, and whatever was left, whatever they could scavenge it. And sometimes they had a German friend that would give them a little food, hoping not to get caught at it. But I did not see any of the major camps where the Americans were kept in. We went through all the way to the, trying to think of anything interesting that we encountered on the way, but we just kept on the move. The Germans were backing off in the north. They're trying to protect, I guess, Berlin and some of the other areas. I kept on the move, and then as the war was nearing an end, we met the Russians at the Elbe River, which was a border with Russia, and we entertained them. They drank our whiskey, we drank their vodka. The officers did anyway, and our guys jitterbugged for them. They did their Cossack dance. We didn't really trust them at that point, although evidently some of our people did, and we let them go into Berlin, which was a mistake. Our intelligence officers, which were in headquarters, they let us know how disappointed they were about Ike's decision. But anyway, we kind of partied with them for a couple of days, and the war came to a close in April. May 5th was the final day. And so we started to move back, ended up at a camp, and I would like you to research this, what I'm telling you. It was what it was called, we were guard duty, Ministerial Documentary Center. It was trucks going in and out, and this was under a mountain. I can't even give you a town. That's the sad part. A beautiful valley, and then they had this huge opening into a mountain. I don't know if they manufactured munitions there. The rumor was that it was a ministerial documentary collection center for artworks and Nuremberg, for the documents for the Nuremberg trial. And these trucks, big army trucks, were in and out of there. We lived in this camp probably until June, and just on guard duty, and we caught up with our records then, everything up to date. The gun crews were somewhat dismantled, and the men in those gun crews were sent off into various groups other than what they were intended for, and be settled in for rotation home sometime in the future. That was our guard duty, and I wish I had taken more information about that collection center. But you've seen the movie where we had this company from the United States that went over there and picked up a lot of the famous paintings and pictures that Hitler had.
The Monuments Men?
Monuments Men, yes. Yeah. And maybe we were guarding some of that. After we had been there till June, we headed to Bremen, Germany, and we traveled back through the northern part of the country. And on our trip back there to Bremen, we're riding along in an open troop carrier truck, and I see a road sign spelled Havekost exactly the way my name is. And it was what I considered a burg. They called the little towns and villages burgs, where the people lived in the town and then had a farm or had property or land outside of the town where they farmed. Anyway, you have certain bitterness in your heart, and that was not important to me. We didn't stop anywhere nearby, so I just put it out of my mind, and we went on, and we were at guard duty guarding a winery there in Bremen. Of all places, what a detail after the war, you know, guarding a winery. And we liked their beer, so we had a little nightclub there, and and we'd send a truck out once a week to get a load of get some kegs of beer brought in from a few miles away. It was crazy. So that kind of takes in my time there. We had a lot of time on our hands because I didn't have enough points. The regular Army guys and the guys with more battle stars or more guys that had been wounded with a Purple Heart and so forth, they all got extra points, and so you were on a point system as to when you would go home. So we were there probably in August in Bremen, and I didn't leave until January. First, I think about 3rd of January, just almost 2 years to the day that I left the United States. And so we just had time on our hands there. And we were split up into various units. Let's see, I became a sergeant before the war ended. When we were going through northern Germany, I became a sergeant, and then a staff sergeant while we were in Bremen. In fact, I at one time had I was going to be sergeant major of the battalion when the sergeant major got transferred out, but that was never put into effect. So I have 4 stripes, 1 on the bottom, 3 on the top, as you know, a staff sergeant. I'll take a break.
All right.
For a little bit. I already told about the Havekost when we went through in the troop carrier, yeah. But then after the war, and researching the Havekost name and had some relatives go over there and visited, I found another Havekost, and that's at Hamburg. It's just south and east of Hamburg, and then you have the Havekost outside of Bremen. So it was kind of an interesting time, and I've had family relatives go back there and visit them, and they've been treated real well, and had toured with some of them around Germany, and that's where my family came from. We researched the family, and we go back to the 1600s. There was a church in Ganderkesee, Germany, that we sent money over there in the mid-40s, later 40s, and they had a gentleman there that researched our family clear back to the 1600s. And since then, we have found out that the Havekosts of Hamburg and the ones by Bremen are interconnected. And I have a nephew that's traveled that whole area and met up with them, and then we've invited them to come to the States, and they've stayed at my property on the lake here in Michigan. So it's my feeling is a little better now toward them. It was kind of inbred at the time that I had no love for them. I mean, the Army, as I told you, you either kill or get killed, but I've relaxed that a little bit. I have friends that were on the islands and fought the Japanese, and to this day we go on the golf course and I'd say, those damn Japs, I wish they weren't here, they would say. I mean, that hatred is just tough to let go, and especially with Hitler, what he did to the people over there and what the Japanese did to our people and all over. It was terrible either way you went. Hitler's dream of world domination just kind of went out the tubes, down the tubes. as the war ended, I was good friends with our chaplain's assistant, and he served us communion whenever Sunday morning was available and we weren't in a combat zone. We'd pull up Army piece of equipment, weapons carrier or Jeep, and he'd serve us communion on the front of the Jeep, and that was a good feeling to have someone like that there. And when the war ended, he was assigned to somewhere for chaplain's duty, and he left us with a Jeep. So we were able to go up into the Netherlands. We traveled. We were in Belgium then, stationed in Belgium after we came back. Yeah, we did stop in town of Maastricht, Belgium, and after we left that valley where the documentary center was, we did stop in Belgium for a while, and so we had a Jeep, and so we traveled in the Netherlands. It's like going from Indiana into Michigan. I mean, those countries are so grouped together, and it's amazing how different they are. So we went and traveled, and through the canals and up into Amsterdam, the Germans had rusting landing craft there. They were just lined up in the canals, ready for the invasion of England. And that was interesting to me to see how far Hitler had advanced and his plans to take over England if we hadn't intervened. I mean, that was history to me, interesting to me, because he had everything pretty much in readiness. They had a sub base there. We got to go through some half-finished submarines that they had on rail cars and things like that. It was an interesting time after the war. And kind of on our own, we had a Jeep and money, and we just traveled around, and it was fun. We had guilders, which was and then we had French francs. These things were sold to us, or given to us, actually. We had French money, we had Netherlands money that just given to us by the government so we could go around and buy things. It was an interesting time for me then, too.
Do you ever think about what the world would be like had Hitler and Germany actually succeeded in their mission?
Often, yeah. Actually, we got the Russians to thank for killing so many of his troops and getting rid of so much of his equipment. I mean, that was devastating to Hitler and his troops. But for the grace of God, had he pulled his forces from down to Normandy, from the northern part up in Belgium and so forth, Le Havre, yeah, in that area, he thought that this movement, I don't know how he could not have figured it out, that the movement was going in Omaha and Utah Beach. But he kept his best troops farther north, thinking that this was just a feint. We weren't really serious about going in there. He thought we would go farther north, where they had more of a level plain and been a little bit easier to land rather than the cliffs that they had there in Omaha, and those are huge. Those are our rangers that scaled those cliffs against murderous fire. It just God was with us. That's all I can say. That the way that things worked out. But
did you think about when you landed in France on the beaches
Omaha,
of Normandy,
yeah.
on Omaha Beach? Did you think about what the infantry had experienced when they landed?
Oh my gosh, yes. And the Rangers that scaled the cliffs. Fortunately, the remnants of the people that went over, the troops that went over in those gliders, and that was just hours long, maybe 2 hours of continuous flow of these gliders being towed over there and dropped behind the lines. That had to be a big help to shut down some of those gun emplacements that the Germans had up there. But they still had, we hadn't really bombarded. We had bombarded so much with our battleships and air power, and yet the Germans were so well in place that we couldn't get them out. And then I saw the emplacements. I mean, we just went up off to one side and then up an area that they had made for us to climb with our battle gear. And but those cliffs were an enormous task. Well, so many of the guys, I mean, that were killed that never got to the shore. They was, yeah, I've thought of that so many times that how Hitler could have, and when I saw all those landing craft in the well, they're roadways, you might call them, the channels in the Netherlands. I mean, how close were we, you know, to invasion of Britain? So I guess the Japanese did us a favor when they bombed Pearl Harbor, and Churchill had worked real hard. My hero, Churchill and Roosevelt, heroes. He'd worked so hard to get the United States involved, and of course we were shipping a lot of supplies over there. And the merchant marine guys, they just were blowing up so many of our ships until we could control their subs or get a handle on that. We were just fortunate that we got through.
Let me ask you, how do you feel that your time in the Army and your experience during the war, how do you feel that shaped you as a man and the man you've become today?
Oh, I grew up so much. And then going off to college, which I had never anticipated doing for a year. A lot of gratitude for that, really. I mean, I come home unscathed and went back to regular, but I like I say, and the same thing with, we had reunions for 35 years. I've got paperwork from one battalion. I've kept all the paperwork of the planes they shot at, what all the activities they went through. From all the while we were, for one whole month, I think this captain kept a whole record of what they went through. I have all that paperwork. We had Army reunions for 35 years after we came home in 45. We went right on up to 70, all over the country. So the men that I was acquainted with, and my hometown guys, they came home. Some of them became plant managers for the Lazy Boys as they spread across the country. There's just so many good things that came out of that, which I told my dad farming was not for me. I came home, I said, I've milked my last cow, I've driven my last horse, and that's it. And then I found a job in the auto industry and then went to Lazy Boy, so, yeah.
Now, if there's any advice that you could give to my generation or future generations, what would that be?
Well, they're going to have to face up to responsibilities. I had one grandson in my family that said, and his mother agreed with it. He said, when we get into a shooting war and I have to go, I'm going to Canada. That hurt me a great deal. That hurt me. I feel that if we have to defend this country, that everybody, like I went. I mean, I went with college guys that had 2-3 years in, that became officers, and at least they went, and they came from good families too. And well, of course, you look at a lot of the people that are veterans that came from real good families. Today, I don't know how that would work. I would hope that our congressmen and senators, their kids would have to go along with everybody else. But we don't know what we're faced with in the future. And I have just got through spending 2 weeks with 11 grandchildren in Denver who love their grandpa and their great-grandpa. And I look to their future. What is it going to be? We seem to be on a road where we're sliding, we're going downhill more than we are up. So it shaped me. Yeah.
The last question I have for you is, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, just as a good grandfather who did his duty. That's to me is everything. They love me and I love them, and I've had 2 good wives. So in remembrance, like here, I mean, these kids entertain me. I mean, they take care of me, and the government has taken care of me. This was so important. The Michigan girls that planned, ladies that planned these things, and the effort of all the volunteers and what all they put together for the veterans in our 90s. I went with an Air Force colonel. I went with some Korean veterans. We had 2 or 3 nurses that were in England. And met some great people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. And so I am happy with my position in life, and thank the good Lord for what he's done for me. I'm blessed. What else can you say? Yeah. And I love this country. And look what we got right outside here. I don't know where these are going, but I know where the cars eventually will end up, but I don't know where the military, I'm looking at military every day here. Yeah, and it's gotten very complicated, complex.
Well, I want to thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For your time,
You're
for
welcome.
sharing your story with